We're going to have some fun in here, making a lot of tweaks and little adjustments. Now, obviously in here we get to make these custom settings, and some of them are going to appear kind of crazy and weird to some people, but for other people, they're going to be very valuable little changes that make life a little bit better. All right, so diving in here, starting with exposure level increments. Now, most still cameras work in third stop increments. It's a nice small amount where you can see just a little bit of an exposure difference from one setting to the next. If you would like to work in half stop increments because maybe you have lights or light meters or other devices that work in half stops, or you just want to, you can do so, but most people will stay in third stops, I assume. Next up, with the ISO, you can work in third stops to be very precise, or you can work in one stop increments so that you can change more quickly. Now, I like having the very exact setting sometimes of 1/3 stops, but I can completely understand somebody who just simply wants to jump from 100 to 400 and do so in less clicks time. So if you were changing radical ISO changes very quickly, you might want to think about doing one-stop changes. Speed from metering, ISO auto. All right, so I have had a problem with this mode in the past because I haven't been able to figure it out. I've read the instruction manual more times than I want to admit. I've checked the on-screen information more times than I would like to admit. I've tried it. I've asked experts at Canon, other experts. Nobody's been able to explain it to me, but I finally have it figured out for you. All right, and that is the reason why it's so hard to figure out is because the instruction manual and all the instructions are written incorrectly, in my opinion. It is not clear as to what they are talking about in there. So translation, writing, English, I don't know where the problem came about. So this is when you have the camera in the auto ISO mode. Do you want the camera returning to auto ISO or jumping to your new manual setting? And this doesn't really explain it, so I will have to show you how this works on the camera. So let's take a look at this. All right, I'm going to make the screen a little bit darker. I'm in a manual mode right now, and you can see my shutter speeds, apertures, and ISOs, and I just don't want this to be distracting, so I'm making it darker than normal here. Let's say I want to go into auto ISO. I'm going to press the M function button, and I'm going to dial down to auto ISO. Brightens up the screen a little bit. But I have control of my shutter speeds, I have control of my apertures, and the camera will automatically adjust ISO according to its needs. Now, if I was to want to make a manual change to the ISO from its auto setting, what I would do is I would turn the quick control dial to. You can see the little orange indicator here. Currently, it's selecting 1000 ISO. If I said, you know what, is that 1,000? That's actually 10,000. If I said I want to have 16,000, and I thought about it for a while and I let the camera reset, I have it on a 4-second reset right now, you can see that it went back down to auto and the camera is back in auto. And I would jump back up to 16,000, and after 4 seconds, it automatically pops down to auto. Now, if I bump it up to, I don't know why it went down to 100, but if I go up to 16,000 and I decide to take a photo, well, now that ISO is kind of locked in because I took a photo there. If I want to put it back into auto ISO, I'll go back down to here, press set, and now you can see it is choosing 10,000. If I select 16,000, it's going to jump back down to auto. All right, so this is where it resets into the auto mode. Now, speed for metering, this is where it automatically restores after metering. Retain speed after metering, okay? So now, if I decide to go up here to 16,000 and the metering times out right there after 4 seconds, it is now at 16,000. So the question here is do you kind of want it to stay in the auto mode, or do you want it to go with your manual setting? And this really depends on how you use the camera. Returning to auto is kind of nice, maybe. This one's really up to you. I don't think it's going to impact a lot of people's photography, but that is how it works. And at least I figured it out, and now you know as well. All right, bracketing auto cancel. So when you have the camera in the bracketing mode, do you want to have it automatically cancel? For the casual user of bracketing, this is great. You don't accidentally leave your camera in the bracketing modes, which would be one of the big no-nos of leaving a feature on. If you're going to be doing bracketing a lot, you might want to turn this off so that you don't have to keep turning the feature back on. And so for the casual user, leave this turned on. It's a nice safe mode. Bracketing sequence. Now the camera will normally shoot the normal exposure first, and then from there shoot the darker exposures and then the lighter exposures. And you can kind of reverse that up a little bit if you want, but I think it makes a lot more sense to shoot the darkest exposure first and the lightest exposure last. That way, when you shoot a series of brackets and another series and another series, it's very clear where one starts and where it ends. And it's going to be a little bit easier, as I say, when you're looking at thumbnails later on after the fact. Number of bracketed shots. So traditionally, a basic bracket would be 3 shots. You can do as little as 2. If you want to have a little bit more coverage, you can do 5. And if you want a lot of coverage, you can do 7. So if you just want to be simple, 3 shots is fine, but 5 shots will get you quite a bit more coverage, and only go to 7 if you really need it, in my opinion. Safety shift. Okay, safety shift is where the camera is going to insert itself into your settings and make a change if it thinks that you're doing something that is incorrect. Now, the way that it makes a change, it can either change shutter speeds or apertures, or it can make the change with ISO. Let's go through a scenario. Let's imagine you are in the time value mode and you are wanting to set a fast shutter speed. You go up to 2,000th of a second, and your lens, which goes down to 1.4, well, that works out in this particular lighting scenario, and everything works out fine. If you were to select, say, a 4,000th of a second, which isn't an option because you don't have enough light there, the camera in the safety shift mode would automatically not allow you to do that. You just can't do that. And serious photographers don't like the camera telling you no, and so they may not like this. But a good option is the ISO option. So let's imagine the same scenario. All right, you're selecting your fast shutter speed of 2,000th of a second with an aperture of 1.4, and now you want to go that one step further up to 4,000th of a second. But rather than not allowing you to do it, it takes the ISO, bumps it up one stop, and allows you to achieve what you wanted with an increase in ISO. Now, the serious photographer probably doesn't like the idea of the camera kind of coming in behind their back and making changes to anything important like shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And so that would be a reason for turning it off. If you do want the camera to come in and save you in case you are to make a bad mistake, I think the ISO option is the better of the options available in there. All right, same exposure for a new aperture. This is where the camera can hold an exposure setting. If you are going to a slower lens, you're adding a teleconverter, you're zooming out, you have a variable aperture zoom. The problem is that this is going to change one of your key critical settings on the camera, like your ISO or your shutter speed. And generally, I just don't like the camera going in and making changes on you behind your back. And so there might be use of this for some people in some situations. Auto exposure lock mode after focus. So when you press down to focus, generally on the shutter release button, but do you want the exposure locked? And this depends a little bit on how you work in there. You can choose that it would lock on certain metering modes, and that once again depends on how often you switch between metering modes. It's not something that's really important for a lot of people, but might affect some people's use of focus, lock, and recompose. Restricting shooting modes. So we went through all these shooting modes back in section 3 on the class. If you find that there are some that you do not need and you don't use and can cause problems, like let's say the bulb mode. You're a sports photographer, bulb mode is kind of interesting and nice, but it's just not what you do on a daily basis. And you don't want to accidentally set that up because you might mess a shot up, because if you get it switched there, it would ruin the exposure. You can uncheck the box, and then it's not even available when you use it on a daily basis. And then when you're doing that once a year bulb shot, you can come in here, check the box off, and it enables that mode to be used. And so just kind of saves yourself from making a mistake. Restricting metering modes. This is another one of those, protecting yourself from making a mistake. If you change metering modes and you don't want one of them available, uncheck the box. Metering used in manual exposure. Now, sometimes people want to have a particular exposure meter when they're in aperture value or shutter priority, and then when they go to manual, maybe they want to have something crazy like spot metering, always selected when they go to that. You could have a special metering mode when you go to manual. The specified option just simply takes whatever you have selected in the camera, and that is applied when you go into manual. And that's what I think most people will have. But if some people manually expose things very differently than they would in aperture or time value modes, well, you can have it set up here, and that's one of the great customizations of a high-end camera like this. Setting the shutter speed range. This is once again protecting yourself from accidentally setting something too high or too low or something out of range. And so most people aren't going to touch this, but there are some situations where you don't want to accidentally select something that is completely inappropriate. As I say, most people aren't going to need this. Same thing goes with the aperture range. You can limit the aperture range to a particular area and then have to come back in here to get the full range if you want it. Auto exposure micro adjustment. So this is kind of adjusting the metering system. If you find that the camera is not metering properly for you, let's say everything's just a tad overexposed or underexposed, rather than doing an exposure compensation or over or underexposing everything, you can come in here and do 1/8 stop adjustments for adjusting the exposure levels. And that way you can be extremely precise about where normal exposure is for you and what you're using. Now you can also make those same adjustments with the flash exposure, and that's probably not necessary, but it's something that you can adjust if you find that problem with your flash exposures. Limiting the continuous shot count. All right, I know where they stole this feature from. Nikon. Nikon's had this for years and nobody else has had it. The idea on this is that if you leave your camera turned on and you shove it into a camera bag and something presses the shutter release, how would you like your camera just firing throughout an airplane flight? Could also be a huge problem, as you can see. So you can limit the burst shooting on this camera anywhere between 2 and 99 shots. It could also be just if you want to make sure that you don't overshoot any particular situation. And so you can set it here if you need it, but most people are probably going to leave this at nothing. And just be aware that you need to turn your camera off before you shove it in a camera bag. Restrict drive modes allows you to turn off options when you normally hit the drive button on the top of the camera or enter the drive mode in the regular menu section. So this is where the custom high-speed mode is normally turned off. So if you are interested in shooting at 195 frames per second, you're going to want to come in here and check off that box for the custom high-speed mode. Now, if there's anything that you don't use, you don't want to accidentally set when you're frantically working out in the field, you might want to uncheck those boxes so that you don't accidentally set them. And so it depends on how you work, whether you like to have things very accessible or not in the field, but that's your camera. All right, direction to set time value and aperture value. Now, normally this is a big setting that I'm going to say you should make this change, but on this particular camera, I'm not going to make my normal recommendation here. And that's because this camera normally uses a vertical exposure indicator. If you turn that vertical exposure indicator off and you want to use the horizontal exposure indicator, well, then listen up here. That horizontal exposure indicator, the way that the dial moves in accordance to the way the dials move is illogical. It's reverse. And so you can reverse. And normally on Canon cameras, I say reverse this because then the dial movement will match the exposure movement on that horizontal exposure indicator. And so if you've ever picked up a Canon camera, gone to set a manual exposure, on most of the cameras, it's kind of counterintuitive the direction that you push the dial. And this will fix the problem. But if you keep that vertical exposure indicator over on the right-hand side of the screen, this really isn't an issue at all and doesn't need to be played with. All right, you can change the direction of the click dials, all right? If you have it set to do apertures or shutter speeds or whatever, and you don't like the way the numbers are changing, well, you can change that. It's just one of those little custom functions. All right, folks, this is the big one. This is why we are in the custom function menus, is to get in and customize the buttons of the camera. This should be the first item in the list, in my opinion, because this is the one that has the most interest and options available in here. And so obviously in here, this is where you get to customize the many different buttons on this camera that you can change from its factory default settings. And so camera of this nature is going to have a lot of different options, and it is going to be impossible for me to show you all the combinations or the combination exactly as you need it, but I can show you how you do it and some of the options to give you an idea of what you can do. You're going to have to do the final legwork in here. But let's go through and make a whole bunch of changes. These are not actually changes that I make, but they're ones to help teach you how to make these changes and to help you see what's totally possible. All right, our first button change is going to be rather simple. We're going to change the light button, which some people don't use very often, to become a menu button. And that is because if you look on the back of the camera, your hand holds the camera over here on the right-hand side. You have pretty quick access to that light button on the top. And if you want to press the menu button, well, you got to move your hand all the way over here to press it. Maybe your left hand is holding the lens and is someplace else and unavailable to press that button. So if you want the menu button a little bit easier to press, well, maybe you want to do that on the light button. So what you do is you dive into the custom buttons and you change that button. And that is what we're going to do right now. Okay, menu button. And we're going to dive over to page 4 in the custom functions. Customize buttons. All right, so now we can use the little joystick to navigate through all of our different little buttons. And the one that we want right now is our light button, which activates the light, which is pretty good for most people, but we want to make a change. So we're going to press set. And now in here, we have all the different options that we can set to this particular function. Now, down here a little bit is going to be the menu. All right, there it is right there. I'm going to hit the set there, and now you can see that the light button will activate the menu. And so this is actually secretly going to help me out in this section of the class because I got my right hand over here, and if I got to go left hand over here to the menu, well, that turns the screen off, and that goes right in front of your view of the camera. That's no good. Now I can press the light button on the top of the camera, and boom, we're into the menu system. And it's a quick and easy way to get to the menu system without reaching over there. I know it's a dumb little thing, but it works out for me. All right, next up, let's make a change to the multifunction button because you can go in and you can customize what is in that. So let's take a look at what we can do in here. So now I'm going to press my customized menu button on the top of the camera. We're going to go into customize buttons. And the multifunction button is right there. You see the little diagram on the left. Listing right there, we're going to press set. Now currently it is set to perform a function called dial function. And I like the concept of it. I just don't like the way it's implemented. You can change it to something else, and there's a load of different things that you can change that button to. But this is a very versatile button. And down here along the bottom, for more information detail set. So we're going to press info, and here is the different items that we get to choose in there. And this is a really important button. So this is something that we want to have really important controls. So ISO, yeah, that fits the need. Drive mode, AF operation. White balance, I don't change so much, but I'll keep it there. Flash exposure compensation. I'm not going to use flash with this camera. Let's uncheck the box. I don't want to use that. Exposure compensation, well, we already got a button right next to that for it. AF area, okay, now that's kind of nice because I might want to reprogram this area button back here. So I am replacing flash with autofocus, all right? And so you can only have 5 things in here. Now, info to go next. So I got the 5 things in here, and now I want to do a little reorganization in here. Okay. I like having exposure information first, and then I want to have focus information second, And that's good there. Now I'm going to go back and grab this other focus information, and I'm going to move it over here. And so I have exposure information, focus, drive settings, and then white balance. Okay, that fits my priority criteria. And I'm going to hit info for OK. And now that's locked in. So now, let me, actually, I'm going to darken the screen here just so that you can see this a little bit more easily. When I press the M function button, I have ISOs first, then my autofocus operation here, autofocus area, my drive settings, and my white balance. And so those are the settings that I want in the multifunction. And so you can see how you can customize that to fit exactly what you want in the order that you want. All right, the next one we're going to play with is the Smart Controller. All right, so this is the tiny little touchpad on the back of the camera that is also your AF on button in here. And so once again, as you recall on this one, when you select, well, if you want to focus, you can press in on the button. It's got a little touchpad, but it's not active normally. You have to press the focusing area, and then you can use the touchpad on this to move this around on here. So we're going to dive into the menu, which I can do right here. Customize buttons. We're looking for the Smart Controller, which is this little icon here. It says so right up on the top. It is turned off. We can do direct AF during metering or all the time. I'm going to say during metering right now. So now when I use this control, you can see it's not moving around. I can still use this control, press it in the middle to go to the center. But when I meter, and you see that little vertical meter over there, when that is lit up, I can go in and I can adjust the focus point with this controller. Right now I have it set to 4 seconds, and after 4 seconds, it'll disappear, and now I cannot make the change. But when I'm metering and I'm actively looking at making changes, I can quickly move that focusing point around by doing that. You can have it all the time with that other setting in there, but I think that's a good option for some people. All right, next up, the multifunction 2 button on the front of the camera, the upper of the 2 buttons. You can have that customized to a large number of things, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it to eye control. And so if you like using eye control, you can just simply turn it on and off by pressing that particular button. So pressing the menu button, going into customize buttons, we're going to look for multifunction 2, which is currently starting and stopping tracking, which is a pretty good mode. And I'm just showing you how to change it because I want to talk about some different things in here. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look down and we're going to have the option of eye control. And notice there's another version of it, moving the point by eye control, and this is turning eye control on and off. Now I'm not going to really be able to show you what this looks like because you got to be looking through the viewfinder in there. But by pressing the button, as you can see it, you have to be in there. You can turn it on and off by just simply pressing the button on the top of the camera right up here, that kind of concave button as opposed to the convex button. And so I think that's a good option for some people who want to quickly go in and out of that eye control. Next up, we can cycle between the set functions. And so there's a number of functions that you can have programmed to a button, and you can just kind of cycle through them. It's kind of like the way we have the multifunction button on the front of the camera. And I'm going to reprogram the multifunction 2 button to do this now. So let's dive in to the menu, customize buttons, multifunction 2. And what we're going to be looking at is for this little symbol that allows us to cycle between the set functions. Now down here at the bottom, we have info detail set. So these are all the things that you can control. All right. Now I'm going to say, you know what? I really don't care about exposure compensation. I like this. I don't do this very often, and mode, and we'll call this good and call that okay. And then we're going to hit set for okay. So now when I hit that button on the front of the camera, you'll see there's my ISO, white balance, drive settings, metering, modes. And so I can just simply, by pressing that top button on the camera, I can cycle through those modes. And so if there's certain modes that you kind of want to set up in a regular way on a regular basis and you just want to access them, it's just a different way of being able to do it. It's not something for everybody, but I think some people will be able to really make use of that. All right, next up, let's do one of the most popular adjustments to cameras today, and that is back button focusing. So, as I mentioned before in the focusing section, sometimes people don't like having focus attributed to the shutter release button on the front of the camera. They would prefer to activate it with the AF on button on the back of the camera. And so if you want to separate the focusing and the shooting photos, well, this is what you do. First up, you need to make sure that the AF on button is set to back button focus, and you need to make sure that the shutter release does not have autofocus set to it. And we can do both of this in the customized buttons here. So we're going to go into the AF on button, make sure that's set up right. We're going to go to the shutter release button and make sure that that is set up right as well. All right, let's dive into the menu system, customize buttons. The first item in here is the shutter release button. Now in here right now, it is set for doing metering, focusing, working by eye control, and what we want is we don't want any focusing, we just want metering. All right, so this way when you press down on the shutter release, the camera will not focus. So that button is now set properly. Now the back button, which is going to be the AF on button, factory default is correctly set on this for back button focus. It is set to meter and autofocus. So now, let's just brighten this up so you can see a little bit more easily in here. And so the camera will meter when I press the shutter release button on the front, but it won't focus. And so if there's something to focus on, it's not focusing. When I press the focus button in the back, oh, too close there, it'll focus there and it will focus there, and I can separate, change my composition, and then shoot my photo as I want there. And so I very much like back button focusing. A lot of more experienced photographers like it. It does take a little while to get used to, but it can be a great way for separating those two functions of the camera. A great button for reprogramming is the AEL button. This is the star button on the back of the camera. It's pretty close to that AF on button. And if you want to set your camera up for double back button focusing, this would probably be the second button you would choose. You can have the AF on set as your kind of standard back button focusing, but you can set up this second button over here, the AEL button, to do something different. So a few options that I'm going to give you, we're not going to set it up for all of these, but some good ideas you might say is you could set this up to be a one-shot servo switch button. So when you press this button, it switches between one shot and servo. So if you go back and forth between those two AF modes, you can quickly do so with the press of a button here. You could have it set up to be eye detection autofocus. And so when you autofocus with this button, it will particularly look for eyes. So if you do a lot of portraits, it might be a good way of just quickly using that eye detection. You can also set it up for just metering and focusing, and set it up for tracking a subject rather than just standard focusing with the AF on button. Now, one of the more interesting customizable options is switch to registered AF function. And this is where you can have it set up to focus, but do so in its own unique and different way. And I would like to show you how that works. So let's dive into the menu, customize buttons. We're going to come down to the asterisk star button right here. We're going to come in here. Now, normally this is set to auto exposure lock and flash exposure lock. And what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to change it to this switch registered AF function. Now, this, like some of the other more detailed options in here, will have detailed setting by pressing the info button. So we're going to go into info, and here is where we have checkboxes, and we can choose particular things. So for instance, in AF area, we could choose to focus on a small point. So no matter what we have currently selected in the camera is going to switch over into a whole area AF. And if we do want it to make this change, we're going to give it a checkbox. Now under subject tracking, we could have this turned on and off, and I'm going to say let's leave this turned on, and we can check to make sure that this is something that we want to have on in this particular case. For subject to detect, we could say, you know what, let's detect people, and let's make sure that this is turned on right now. Now these other things, we're not going to select as turning on, but there are options in here that we can use. And so we're going to hit menu to back out of this. And we're going to make sure that we press the set button so that this is selected and you can see that the star has the AF switching mode. So right now we have it set up. I'm a little on the dark side, but that's fine for now. The camera will focus on the box that I have selected in there right now. Okay, but if I press the star button, you can see it immediately comes over and looks for the face. And that's because we told it to look for faces and track that subject around. So I can have one little focusing point and see if it can focus on something close up here. And then when I press the star button, it immediately goes for the face to select that to focus on. And so this is a great way of having your camera set up to do two different things very, very quickly. All right, next up, the AF point button. Now we saw how you could move that AF point selection button someplace else on the camera. So this could set up 3-button AF focus on the back of the camera. Now, one of the more interesting options is you could set it to register recall shooting function. And this is where you can have the camera completely change operational mode with the press of a button. It's kind of like the custom 1, custom 2, custom 3 that you could do with the mode button on the top of the camera. But, well, let me just show you how this is going to work because it's a little bit involved. Let's dive into the menu, customize buttons. We want this button over here in the corner. We'll look for the little symbol, which is right there. AF point selection. I know that's a good thing to have there, but if you want to make a change, we're going to look for this little camera swapping out option, and it's going to be buried down here somewhere. And I might have missed it here. There it is over here. All right, so once again, it's one of these deeper buttons. It's going to have detailed setting by pressing the info button. All right, so what do we want to have change when we press that button? Well, let's just say we wanted the camera to change to a time value mode. Okay, so time is very important. Let's change our shutter speed to 1/1000th of a second. Let's change our ISO. That's at auto, that's pretty good. Multi-segment metering is fine. No exposure compensation. White balance is fine. AF area, let's just select AF area 3 just for kicks. Subject tracking on, let's not have this set to anything particular. And you'll see a number of other tweaks and adjustments. We're not going to worry about all of these, but you can see that there is a whole host of things that you can set. Now be careful about this one. Register current settings. This registers whatever you have programmed on the camera right now. This is what I want to set in here is these kind of special time value 1/1000th of a second things. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to press menu to exit out of this because all of this is set in here properly. And I'm going to make sure to press set button there so that this button up here is now reprogrammed in this other setting. So as you can see here, I am in a manual mode and I can select my shutter speeds and apertures and get my exposure. But when I press this button over here, the camera immediately switches to time value at 1/1000th of a second. And so if you wanted to immediately have the camera set up for a certain type of shot, you can do so with a single press of a button. And that is actually 1 or 2 steps quicker than the custom 1, 2, and 3 settings. It's probably not as comfortable for shooting on a long period of time. So if you plan to shoot there for 5 minutes, you'd have to leave your finger on that button for 5 minutes. If you just want a single one-off shot, this could be really handy. Let's say you're shooting a sporting event and you've got your camera trained out on the field, you got lots of action, you're shooting servo, high-speed, continuous, but occasionally you want to point over to the coach who's generally just standing around or sitting there, and they're stationary, and you want to have the camera set up in a different mode for the stationary subject versus the action that you're regularly shooting. And so that's just one of a million different case scenarios where it's nice to be able to switch the camera with the press of a button very quickly. So tons of buttons in there. I encourage you to kind of really explore some of those options because I've shown you some of the more interesting ones, but I think there's some other ones in there that you are likely to find that will work well for whatever it is that you do on the camera. Next up, customizing the dials. So the camera has a lot of different dials that can be customized. So if you don't like where the shutter speeds or apertures or ISOs are set, well, you can move those around. And don't forget the control ring out on the lens, you can set that up as well. And so when you dive into these, you'll see that each of these has their own settings that they can be customized to. And this is just a matter of personal preference, of course. Let's first look on how to customize the quick control dial. I'm going to change it to Select AF method, and you'll see why this might work for some people in some situations. So we do have a number of ways of controlling the camera, and as far as the focusing direction and point, but we're going to do a new way. So we're going to dive into the menu, customize the dial. We're going to come down here to the quick control dial. And there's not a lot of options in here. What we're going to do is we're going to change it to a direct AF point selection. Once again, info detail set. We can go up and down or we can go left and right. And I'm going to go left and right. And I'm going to make sure to hit the set button to make sure that this is selected. Now I am going to make an additional change here is I am going to select a vertical area for focusing. So that's our horizontal, that's our vertical right there. All right, I'm going to darken this image, if I can here, a little bit so we can see where this focus area is. Now, when I turn the dial back and forth, I can simply very quickly and easily, and with a very tactile feel, I can move that focusing area from side to side. Now, currently we have the camera set up in manual, which means that my dial on the top of the camera, the main dial is changing my shutter speeds. This is controlling my ISOs, and the back dial, which normally controls the apertures, well, now it's controlling where the focusing area is. And how do I change the aperture? Well, I press the plus minus button on the top of the camera, and I can select different aperture down here and get in and out of that. So it's just a different way of working, and I could see focusing on somebody, and that dial control is very nice. If you don't need it for something else, changing on a regular basis, it can quickly, with a very tactile feel, because it's got a very good feel of those clicks on there, you can move that focusing point from side to side. So just one of many different creative ways of customizing the dials. Now the control ring out on the lens. Now this is a great new feature of this whole arm mount system, is that a lot of the lenses are going to have a control ring that you can customize to do something unique and different. So for instance, one of the interesting options is changing the focusing area. So let's have it select the focus area. Let's dive into the menu, customize the dials. We're going to select the control ring, and we're going to have it select the AF area. And so there you'll see there's a few options in here. We'll talk about the arrows coming up here in a moment. And so this is the AF area. And so now when we turn the focusing ring on the camera, you can see that we are selecting the different focusing points. And so this is a way of quickly changing from one to the next. And so if you are frequently changing focusing points, this is a very easy way to do it. The problem is it might be a little too easy for some people. So what we can do is we can take that control ring and we're going to set it up into kind of a little safety mechanism for changing its next setting, which is ISO setting. So you can do the control ring, controlling your ISOs with that same easy turning, but maybe you want to have just a little bit of safety put in there. Let's dive into the menu, customizing the dials, control ring, and we're going to do ISO with a arrow pressing down, hold meter button down. Okay, so now we're going to be able to change the ISO by turning the control ring, but not just by turning the control ring. That doesn't do anything on its own, as you can see. What we have to do is we have to press down on the shutter release, and then we can change our ISO setting only when we are pressing down on the shutter release. And so it's kind of just a safety lock so that we can only make the change when we actually want it to change. And so that can work for the focusing area, the ISO, or whatever settings they have available to you to set in there. And I really like that option because it's an easy dial to get to, but sometimes it's a little too easy to bump. And that adds just a little bit of a lock switch in there so that you don't make a mistake. So Another area for you to explore and customize. All right, if you've made a mess and you've been playing around while we've been going through this section of the class, you can clear out those customized settings here and go back to the default settings and start over again. So nice little option if you've messed up. Moving on to page 5, the switch in the back of the camera that switches between stills and movie. For some people, they don't want to shoot movies. They're not interested in shooting movies. They don't shoot movies. Let's use the button for something else, or the switch, I should say. You could have the switch go between silent function and normal function. And this is something that not a lot of people are going to use, but if you're the type of person who wants to put your camera very quickly into a quiet mode, well, it's an interesting option if you don't want to shoot movies in there at all. The smart controller, talked a little bit about this. The AF on button, it's a press button for focusing, and it becomes a touchpad when you are actively changing the focusing point in here. So if you want to completely disable this so that you don't accidentally move the focusing point around, you can completely disable it. It's only active after you have pressed the AF point selection button. Now you can disable it when you're using the camera in vertical if you wanted. Sometimes people hold the camera a little bit differently in vertical, and it's kind of nice to turn some controls off. I think normally leave it on enable so that when you are making an AF point selection, you can move your focusing point around with that little touchpad. Now, if you want to, you press the Q button and go into the sensitivity. I find that this moves the focusing point around a little too quick and jumpy in my opinion. And so I might want to bring that down a little bit on the minus side. And so if you agree with me, you might try that, but adjust according to your own needs, of course. Vertical shooting controls. So there's a number of controls that are doubled up on this camera for shooting in vertical. Some people don't use the camera in quite the same fashion, and they bump these controls and they cause problems. And so if you want to disable these controls all the time or disable them when the camera is in the lock mode, you can disable them. If you shoot a lot in vertical, you want to leave this on so that you have access to these controls. All right, on to page 6. We talked a little bit about adding cropping information. This is something that will be either visible in camera or with software. And so if you want to add that cropping information in, you can do so here. And you'll see that in the viewfinder and on the monitor on the back of the camera. Now the shutter release time lag controls the triggering of the image after the press of the shutter. Now, in one sense, you would think, well, I want it to be the quickest possible. Well, the problem with being the quickest possible is it's inconsistent between the different shutter options you have available in the camera. Now, I've played around a bit with this, and I have a hard time really noticing a difference here. And so this might be of more use for somebody in a scientific testing environment. It's not something I think a casual user will notice much difference in the timing of the press of the button and the actual taking of the photograph. And so standard is a little bit more consistent from one setting to the next. You can shorten it by putting it into the shorten mode, but then it's notably different between mechanical and electronic. So only going to affect, I think, a very small percentage of people on this one. You can change the audio compression that audio is recorded at when you are shooting movies in this camera. So if you don't need as good a quality audio or you want to save space, you can use a lower quality mode, a smaller file size here. But I imagine a lot of people will not be doing that. Default erase option. All right, this is a feature that I'm glad they have in here in the custom functions because everybody works a little bit differently. Now, normally to delete a photo, it takes 3 actions to delete a photo. You have to press the garbage can button. You have to select that you actually want it deleted, and then you press the set button. And this is, of course, after you've taken the photo and played it back. This is just when you're looking at the image on the back of the camera. Now, I think that's just a few too many steps. I would like to have it a little bit quicker access. So if you have erase selected, erase is the default option. So when you press the erase button, you just have to press the set button. So if you want to reduce the number of presses to delete a picture, this will do so by 1 step. Aperture value without lens. So if you do not have a lens on the camera, normally it doesn't allow you to set an aperture because there's no aperture to set. But if you would like to be able to set that up before you put your lens on the camera, you can enable this. And so it's not something that you can do with normal cameras, but if you find that useful here, you can turn it on. Release shutter without a lens. So do you want to be able to fire the shutter without a lens? Now, for safety reasons, generally you should leave this turned off so that you don't accidentally have the shutter movement. The fear is that somebody would have their finger in the viewfinder, press the shutter release, and then it would open and close on your finger and probably destroy the shutter, which is going to be a very, very expensive repair. Now, the reason that you might want to turn this on is if you are hooking on some sort of lens attachment or telescope that the camera does not recognize as a lens. And so there are certain third-party lenses and lens adapters and other things like telescopes, as I say, microscopes, where you would need to turn this on so that you can fire the shutter with unusual devices mounted to the front of the camera. Retract lens on power off. There are a small number of lenses that have this automatic, well, the lens will move in and out depending on how the optical elements move. And if you have this turned on, the lens will retract into its normal storage position when you turn the camera off. Generally a good thing for most people in most situations. Might not be good if you are, say, setting your camera up on a tripod, you're focusing very carefully on a subject, and you're going to turn it off and go to lunch because it's a scientific experiment that you're doing, and you want to come back, turn the camera on, and not have the focus one whiff difference than it was before you turned the camera off. And so if you want it to remain in its outward position, you could turn this off. And so that might be good for some people, very particular situations there, obviously. IPTC information is something that you can add in using the Canon software. This is something that maybe a sports photographer or a photojournalist might add in, and this adds a bunch of metadata just right onto all the photos that you're shooting. We talked about how you could add your name and copyright information. Well, this is kind of an extension of that, where you could have a whole lot of information, and this can be helpful in organizations where photos are getting passed around quite a bit. But you will need the Canon software in order to make that possible. And then on our final page, we can clear all the custom functions on the camera. So there's a few items that'll be retained, but generally this will clear out all of the settings that we've talked about in this particular section. All right, another great area for customization is in the My Menu tab. So My Menu is a great shortcut. You know, on the first digital cameras, there wasn't a My Menu because there wasn't that many functions in there. And then as the menus grew and grew and grew, it was nice to have a little shortcut place where you could store all of your favorite items from the menu. And that's what My Menu is. And it has grown a bit. We can now have different tabs and groupings of items in here. So what you want to do is you want to think about all the items you want to come back to on a regular basis, and you want to add them into My Menu. You'll come into Configure, and you will be able to add items in here. So once you're in Configure, you'll go through and look through all the items that you want to have, and you can have those grouped onto different tabs. Now, the way I've had my camera set up is I go through different types of photography. I might have landscape photography and action photography, and there are different things that I'm accessing between those. And so I might first set up a general tab, and on the general tab, I might have battery information and card setup and card format. And then in landscape, I might have bracketing and some other things that I might do, focus stacking in there, for instance. In portrait photography, I might turn on different focus options where I can do focus tracking in there. And so you can group things up like that. So let's dive in and take a look through My Menu, add a few items in here. So let's go ahead and dive into the menu, get over to the My Menu. We're going to start Add My Menu tab. Yep, let's do that. All right, our first tab. Now, the second tab is always going to be the last tab, I should say, is always going to be the Organization tab. First one here, let's configure this one. Select items to register. Okay, so I can start going through, and here is a basic list of items from the menu that we can select in here. So image type and size, that one's really important. I'm going to log that in. And you can go through and find other things that you find helpful in here. Let's just say you deal with flicker situations, and so you want to add in the flicker option, the high frequency flicker option. Let's see if we can find anything else in here that you might do on a regular basis. Let's just say you work with the bulb timer. And then let's just go way down in here. You can see there's a ton of items that you can add in here. And it's basically going through the menu system in here. Let's say we want to customize the buttons, a quick access to that. There's a few other good ones here towards the end that we can go through. And so we'll call it good at that. And so we're going to hit menu to back out of this. We're going to sort these items now. So we could say, you know what, we want our customized buttons to be up here. We want our bulb timer to be actually above the customized buttons. And so now this is all customized the way that we like it. Now I could rename this tab as, you know, my general tab or my landscape or my sports tab. But I'm not going to bother going in and doing that. Just you can type in whatever you want there. And so when I come back out, you'll see that I have my organization tab here and my first tab is here. Now, something else that you may want to do is menu display from my menu tab. All right, so now as we go into the menu and we go someplace else and we make a setting in here and we come back to press the menu, it comes back to my menu. So this is where all of your important stuff should be. Now you could select this up to display from only my menu tab so people can't get to the regular menu in there. So if you wanted to put a restriction on somebody else using your camera, that would be a pretty serious restriction. They can't even get to change things. And so I think display from my menu tab is a good option for a lot of people. Depends on how you access the menu and what you've put in there. But I think there's a lot of great options for accessing features that you get back to on a regular basis. So I think if you do it right, you'll never get lost in the menu because anything you set up to use on a regular basis, you'll have there in my menu. So this is something that's going to take a little time on your part to go through and figure out what are the categories that you want and what are the items you want in each of those categories. And so this is a great time to take a little break from all this technical talk and play with your technical camera and get your camera set up with the perfect menu system for what you need.